At exactly 38 seconds in, the room detonated rhetorically, but with a force that felt like glass shattering inward, cutting through the polished calm of the Oversight Committee chambers like a jagged blade. A congressional aide gasped audibly as the number flashed across the LED display. $125 million. It wasn't a typo. $125 million, funneled through shell contracts, missing from programs meant for disabled veterans and widowed mothers, funds meant for the people who kept the country alive gone, ripped from the bones of America by the very man now smirking across from her. The nation watched, tens of millions of eyes, as Donald J. Trump leaned back in his chair, arms folded, face a collage of smug and defiance. What kind of man calls a sitting congresswoman a freeloader while pocketing taxpayer blood money? And what was Jasmine Crockett about to do with the evidence still clutched in her hand? The room exhaled slowly, like a wound reopening. The ceiling lights above the Capitol hearing room burned down like surgical lamps, casting a pale cruelty over the mahogany table where Jasmine Crockett sat, flanked by murmuring aides and stunned committee members. The walls seemed to lean forward, the marble sweating under the pressure of history. Every breath inside the chamber felt rationed, like truth was oxygen, and everyone was starving for it. The air bled tension. The walls whispered things they could no longer keep secret. Donald Trump had swaggered into the hearing, wearing his usual armor of bravado press suit, too bright tie, and that particular grin that suggested nothing could touch him. That was before Jasmine Crockett stood up, before the folder in her hand began to hum like it was alive, before the documents inside it began whispering the numbers that would silence the country. "Mr. Trump," she said, voice calm, deliberate, devoid of heat but rich in the promise of devastation. "You called me a freeloader on national television. Said I sucked off the system while you built America. You used that word. Sucked. Well, I hope you're ready to choke on the truth." The room didn't breathe. A phone buzzed faintly from somewhere in the crowd. Then nothing. Behind her, in the standing room-only gallery, veterans in full uniform stood shoulder to shoulder with single mothers holding photos of their children. Cameras hovered like vultures. Every word Jasmine Crockett spoke was being broadcast live to homes in Tulsa, schools in Atlanta, living rooms in El Paso. In a modest brick house in Milwaukee, Angela Reyes clutched her father's medal from Iraq and muttered, "Please, make him pay." Jasmine opened the folder. The paper was thick, official, textured like dried blood. She held it with reverence, letting the seal of the Office of the Inspector General catch the surgical light. "This," she said, raising it slightly, "is a federal audit from March 15, 2024. It tracks $125 million in pandemic recovery funds redirected to a private contractor in Virginia Beach-owned, operated, and silently subsidized by the Trump Organization under the name Patriot Health Logistics." She paused, just long enough to let it sink in. They never delivered a single ventilator, not one, but they billed the Department of Defense for 27,000 units. Trump shifted. Not much, just the shoulders, but enough to notice. Jasmine didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Rebecca Lyle, age 7, Bronx, New York, died April 12, 2024. Her hospital was promised 10 ventilators, got 0. Her mother held her hand while her lungs gave out. A Moana quiet human sound came from the back of the chamber. One of the mothers. "In your world," Jasmine said slowly, "that's just another invoice. In mine, that's a child you killed with your signature." Trump laughed, a low, disdainful scoff that echoed off the marble. "I don't sign invoices, sweetheart. I sign checks. That's why you hate me." Jasmine's head tilted, slowly, like a scalpel preparing its angle. "You sign checks?" Her voice didn't rise. It sharpened. "Funny. Because this," she pulled another document from the folder with surgical precision, "is your signature on a wire transfer. March 29th, $5 million. Not to a hospital, to a Shell LLC in Delaware. Want to know what they bought with it?" She turned the page, held up a grainy photo. a warehouse full of gold-plated massage chairs. The silence had fangs now. $5 million, she whispered, in massage chairs while children suffocated. A screen to the left flickered on, showing the warehouse, rows of untouched chairs stacked like thrones for ghosts. And still, she wasn't finished. Her hands moved through the folder like a pianist playing a concerto of consequences. Another document, another name. Gunnery Sergeant Matthew Holt, Gulf War veteran, 52, diabetic, lost his left leg in Fallujah, was promised outpatient treatment funded by the CARES Act. That funding disappeared right around the time your golf course in Mar-a-Lago reported a sudden renovation expense of $3.5 million. Now Trump leaned forward, a tick in his jaw, a pulse in his temple. "Watch yourself, Congresswoman," he muttered. Jasmine finally turned her eyes to meet his, cold, unbroken. "Sir, the only thing I watch is the truth," she said, her voice a scalpel wrapped in velvet. "And it doesn't need your permission to exist." Phones were lighting up across the country. Veterans on TikTok, teachers on live streams, grieving families on FaceTime. People weren't watching television, they were watching justice manifest through one woman's hands. Jasmine Crockett wasn't yelling. She wasn't grandstanding, she was documenting. She laid the final document down, face up. A contract. Signed, stamped, time-stamped, and dripping with guilt. "We'll get into names," she said, folding her hands, "real soon. But before I continue, I'd like to ask you one question, Mr. Trump." She leaned in. The room leaned with her. "You called me a freeloader. What exactly do you call a man who siphons $125 million from veterans, lets children die, and buys himself chairs he'll never sit in?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was loaded. It howled. The silence hadn't even settled when Trump snapped back, voice jagged like cracked porcelain. "This is a witch hunt. Political theater. You're just another grandstanding Democrat trying to score clout." Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She simply reached beneath the folder and slid out a second envelope thicker, older, sealed in worn federal tape like a forgotten relic exhumed for Judgment Day. "This isn't theater, Mr. Trump," she said, placing it on the table with the weight of a gavel. "This is a federal criminal referral from the Department of Veterans Affairs Inspector General, dated February 2nd, 2024. It names 17 shell companies. 15 of them lead to Patriot Health Logistics. 12 of those linked directly to Trump Foundation assets. 6 had your children on their boards." Gasps spread like fire. Chairs shifted. Phones shook. On screen, Twitter servers flickered under pressure. Jasmine stood slowly. "This is a list," she said, carefully pulling papers from the envelope, "of every one of the 23 hospitals denied pandemic ventilators after signing contracts with Patriot Health Logistics. This one," she held up a page, "was Methodist Regional in El Paso, Texas. They had 80 beds. 12 of their patients were under the age of 10. 4 died. 3 of them were asthmatic. All 4 were black." A nurse watching from home in El Paso sobbed into her uniform. At a barbershop in Detroit, a television blared Jasmine's voice as everyone fell silent. On a ranch in Wyoming, a veteran stood from his porch, removed his hat, and whispered, "God bless that woman." She laid out each document like a blade. Facility name, contract date, promised quantity, received quantity 0 after 0 after 0. Then she lifted a final page, a reimbursement form submitted to the Treasury Department for logistics and equipment disbursement. Amount, $38 million. "Paid," she said, "in full, even though no equipment was ever delivered. Because you don't just steal money, Mr. Trump. You steal time. You steal chances. You steal breath." Trump tried to interrupt. "You don't know what you're talking about." But the mic clipped his voice, feedback crackling like static regret. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. "You talk like I'm beneath you," she said, stepping forward with deliberate grace. "You called me a freeloader, but the only thing I've taken from this government is responsibility. And I don't run from it. I report for duty." She dropped another document on the table with a thud. This one darker, thicker, almost glossy. It bled numbers. Line items from Mar-a-Lago's fiscal statements, filed January 3rd. $3.5 million in medical transport upgrades. She flipped the page. Invoices show that money was used to purchase 2 luxury golf carts, equipped with champagne compartments and chrome rims, paid for with redirected COVID relief funds. A laugh sputtered out from somewhere in the crowd. Not joy, disbelief. Like the truth was too grotesque to be fiction. "Tell me," Jasmine asked softly, "was that for the veterans too? Or just your backswing?" Trump shot back in full force now, voice cracking. "You don't get to talk to me like that! You're nothing! You were nobody before this committee!" The air recoiled. It bled heat. Jasmine leaned into the microphone, surgical lighting catching the gold trim on her congressional badge. "And yet here we are," she said, calm as winter steel, "with me holding your crimes like a mirror, and you finally being forced to look." She took a single sheet of paper crisp, bright white, and held it up between 2 fingers. "This is a sworn deposition from Janice Tran, former logistics coordinator at Patriot Health. She's a Trump supporter. Lifelong. Gave $2,000 to your campaign in 2020. But when she saw the order cancellations, the dummy invoices, the bank account reroutes, she came forward. Want to know why?" She turned the paper around. "Because her father died in one of those understocked hospitals. Walter Tran, Navy, 69, kidney failure, needed a ventilator, got a plastic tube and a prayer instead." Trump's face darkened, jaw clenched, hands gripping the edge of the table like he was trying to stop the truth from rising. "She was told not to talk," Jasmine added. "Told to shut up, or the family would regret it." She let the words sit like ash on the air. "Those threats came from your office." Behind her, Rep. Linda Escobar whispered into her mic, "Jesus Christ." On the screens behind Jasmine, the scroll began. Hospital names, patient deaths, contract dates, ghost LLCs, transaction records, a digital wall of receipts. "You said I was freeloading?" Jasmine's voice sliced through the murmurs. "You're the one robbing a country blind while lying to its face. I've been doing the work. You've been staging the con." Trump banged his fist once on the table, hard. "I built this country's economy." Jasmine pivoted. One motion, one line, surgical precision. "No, sir. You built a Ponzi scheme on the backs of the dead, and now the bill is due." The gallery broke. Reporters stood. Families cried. Veterans saluted. In Chicago, a classroom of 10th graders paused their history lesson to watch the live stream. A teacher wiped her eyes. "This," she whispered, "is why we teach civics." And still, Jasmine wasn't done. She held up one final document, a digital transfer receipt. "January 25th, she said, "you wired $600,000 to a lobbying firm to block the release of the Inspector General's report. That's obstruction." Trump paled. "That's felony obstruction," she clarified, "of a federal pandemic investigation." Trump opened his mouth, but no sound came. Behind him, one of his attorneys stood, whispering frantically. Another one packed a folder. Jasmine didn't even glance at them. "This is not the part where you interrupt, Mr. Trump," she said, folding her hands again. "This is the part where the truth starts counting down." The room was still reeling when Jasmine Crockett reached into her leather briefcase, a quiet gesture, but it moved the room like thunder stalking just beyond sight. She withdrew a flat, red file with gold stitching across the edge. A veteran's case file. Its weight was not symbolic. It held court-martial transcripts, VA denial letters, and a discharge report stamped with "rejected" in fading red ink. Jasmine set it gently in front of her. Her hands moved with reverence, not for the paper, but for the man it belonged to. "Before we continue with wire fraud," she said, voice low but unmistakably sharp, "I want to introduce someone who isn't with us today. Staff Sergeant Kevin Malloy. Served 3 tours in Afghanistan. Bronze Star. Father of 2. After returning home, he applied for emergency pandemic housing under the American Rescue Plan." She paused. He was denied. The gallery held its breath. Denied because the funds were no longer available. Those funds, Mr. Trump, were rerouted to Trump Hospitality Holdings for what your CFO called emergency infrastructure stabilization. She reached for the receipt-thick cardstock, navy ink, the kind you don't shred but frame. $6.2 million, used to install marble jacuzzis in the guest suites of the Trump International Hotel in Chicago. The room groaned, like the walls themselves couldn't hold this kind of rot. Someone whispered, "Jesus." Jasmine continued. Staff Sergeant Malloy died in a shelter 3 weeks later. Pneumonia. Unheated facility. He was 41. Now she looked at Trump. That's not freeloading. That's being left to die in a country you defended, because a former president wanted fancier bathtubs. Trump shook his head, muttering, "This is emotional garbage. None of this is proven." Jasmine didn't blink. She slid another document forward, a signed internal memo from the Trump Foundation, dated November 6, 2023. This is your son Eric's signature, approving the transfer of pandemic infrastructure funds for what he called luxury morale upgrades. It's notarized. It's time-stamped. It's real. She stood again. But if you want proof, she reached for the last object in her briefcase, a black envelope sealed with a Department of Justice wax emblem. She opened it with a swift tear that echoed like a courtroom gavel. Then let's talk subpoenas. The gallery stiffened. Reporters sat bolt upright. Jasmine pulled out the subpoena set 6 pages, pristine, bound with red twine. These were issued 72 hours ago. 6 banks, 8 Trump subsidiaries, 4 personal accounts, all frozen pending investigation. She laid them out like tarot cards of doom. Bank of New York Mellon, Trump Resorts International, Trump Wellness Holdings, Eric, Trump Personal Checking. Trump leaned back like he'd been hit. The camera caught his lip twitching. A visible bead of sweat rolled near his temple. Even his signature bravado seemed to buckle. Jasmine, still composed, still precise, continued. 173 separate transactions, totaling over $87 million, moved offshore between October 2023 and January 2024. 13 of them occurred within 12 hours of the Patriot Health Logistics indictment being leaked to the press. She circled a date on one subpoena and turned it toward Trump. This was 2 hours after your Truth Social post claiming you'd never touched pandemic funds. Sir, that wasn't a denial. That was a preamble to obstruction. Her voice dropped to a surgical whisper. You moved $87 million across the globe, while veterans slept in cars and babies coughed in unventilated hospitals. Trump spat. You want to talk about money? Where were you when Congress approved all this spending? You didn't stop it. No, Jasmine replied, her voice like frostbite. I didn't stop Congress from trusting the executive branch. But I am here now, Mr. Trump, to stop the lie from becoming legacy. The room shook with a burst of camera flashes, reporters murmuring into hot mics, anchors breathless with the velocity of the moment. On screens across America, live reactions poured in. A veteran in Phoenix uploaded a video in full uniform, holding his daughter. She's here because of Jasmine Crockett. Period. In Baton Rouge, a single mom watching from her break room texted her sister, "She's doing it. She's actually doing it." A bar in Philadelphia paused the Phillies game. A chant started, "Crockett, Crockett, Crockett." And in a nursing home in Des Moines, a 90-year-old WWII vet tapped his cane twice against the floor. "Took too long," he whispered, "but she's the one." Back in the chamber, Jasmine slowly gathered her papers. The microphones caught the sound of parchment rubbing together soft, deadly. "I came here today not to win a headline," she said, voice now almost tender, "but to reclaim a truth too many people have been tricked into forgetting." She looked directly into the cameras. Government doesn't exist to comfort the powerful. It exists to protect the vulnerable. If a leader uses his power to abandon the people who trusted him, that's not politics. That's betrayal. She turned back to Trump. And the receipts, Mr. Trump, don't lie, but they do remember. His mouth opened, then shut. No words. No bluster. Just silence. Jasmine nodded toward the chairwoman. I yield my time, but not my resolve. Applause erupted not from the committee, but from the gallery. Veterans, parents, nurses, the people who had suffered in silence, finally watching someone speak their truth with scalpel-sharp clarity. And in that silence that followed, America was no longer asking if Donald Trump would fall. They were only asking, how hard? Before the echoes faded from the chamber walls, Jasmine Crockett moved again, this time not with documents, but with memory. She reached beneath the table and retrieved a narrow, hard-bound black binder. No label, no insignia, just plain, ominous weight. It landed with a flat thud that silenced even the gallery's murmurs. The binder had no theatrics, but the fear it generated was immediate. Trump's legal team shifted. One stood. Another whispered into a phone. This, Jasmine said, laying her palm on the binder, is the Veterans Omission Log, compiled quietly over 18 months by whistleblowers, archivists, and overlooked caseworkers. It contains the names of 871 veterans whose benefits were frozen, stalled, or erased during the pandemic during the precise months your businesses were absorbing emergency infrastructure funds. She unlatched the cover. It clicked open like a vault. The file doesn't scream, Mr. Trump. It doesn't accuse. It just documents. She opened to the first page. Brandon Kilmer, age 33, Marine Corps, traumatic brain injury. His claim was approved in February 2024, then inexplicably denied in March. Reason? System disruption due to funding misallocation. He died 2 months later. Seizure in a motel parking lot in Omaha. She flipped another page. Lorenzo Daniels, age 65, Army, worked as a public school janitor after retirement, diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. Denied travel funding to get to his VA hospital because his zip code was flagged for regional defunding alignment. That alignment coincides perfectly with Trump Realty's real estate expansions in those areas. Trump leaned back, hands spread in disbelief. You're spinning bureaucratic paperwork like it's a novel. You don't have anything personal. Jasmine paused, closed the binder, lifted a small photo from beneath it. She held it out, between 2 fingers. I do. She passed it to the bailiff. It made its way down the line until it reached Trump's trembling hands. His face blanched. This photo, Jasmine said, was taken July 15, 2024. It shows you walking through the construction site of Trump Rejuvenation Resort, Miami. You're smiling, holding a cocktail. What's in the background is what matters. She gestured toward the screen. It lit up with the full image. Behind Trump, a stack of ventilators, new, boxed, untouched, wrapped in Patriot Health logistics tape. They were meant for Milwaukee VA Hospital. They were never delivered. Instead, they were stockpiled as potential resale assets. That was your term, sir. And while you sipped and smiled, a nurse in Milwaukee held a phone to a veteran's ear so he could say goodbye to his son. His name was William Carrington. He was 78. A guttural sound escaped from the gallery. William's daughter was there. She collapsed into her seat, sobbing. Jasmine's voice softened, but the blade only sank deeper. Truth doesn't shout. It bleeds. She lifted the final sheet from the Foldera page, marked with the seal of the Department of Justice, heavy watermark, and 3 signatures. Garland, Crockett, Tran. This is a sealed agreement between the DOJ and former Patriot Health CFO Sarah Holt, granting her whistleblower protection and full testimony immunity. She turned slowly to Trump, eyes narrowing. She names you, your children, your campaign PAC, and your foundation in 32 distinct counts of misappropriation, wire fraud, and criminal negligence. Each count is supported by time-stamped invoices, shipment logs, and cross-referenced contract deletions. Trump stood up, shaking. His voice cracked. This is a political assassination. I built businesses. I saved jobs. You're just a liar in pearls playing lawyer on TV. Jasmine's lips didn't move. Not yet. She waited. Let the words hang. Then she walked toward him calm, unblinking, binder in one hand, the final subpoena in the other. She stopped 6 feet away. You didn't build jobs. You buried evidence under chandeliers and let America rot outside your gates. She handed him the subpoena. You are hereby summoned to appear before the Federal Court of the District of Columbia on charges of fraud, obstruction, and criminal profiteering. The room exploded. Gasps, cries, reporters shrieking into their phones ringing across the country. In Houston, a veteran yelled from his hospital bed, "Finally!" In Minneapolis, a group of medical students paused their rounds and saluted the TV. In Georgia, a teenager watching with her civics class asked, "Why is she not president yet?" Trump staggered back to his seat. For the first time, he looked small. Jasmine returned to her microphone, voice low and steady. You tried to turn crisis into capital. You thought silence was loyalty. You thought no one would notice the documents hiding in the fire. But I found them. I followed them. And now, you follow them too into a courtroom. He didn't respond. Jasmine let the silence expand. You called me a freeloader. You called me irrelevant. But today I called your bluff. And your bluster can't cash the checks your lies have written. Chairwoman Mallory nodded. Congresswoman Crockett, you may conclude. Jasmine nodded back and turned to the nation. To every family who lost a loved one because they were told there wasn't enough when there was, just locked away in golden rooms, I see you. And I promise, you were never freeloaders. You were failed. Her voice, for the first time, cracked slightly. And we won't let it happen again. Behind her, veterans stood. Nurses stood. The gallery rose like a wave of memory and rage and long overdue justice. And Donald Trump? He didn't move. Because when Jasmine Crockett wields the truth, even titans of illusion are forced to kneel. The air in the chamber had transformed less a room now than a reckoning. The walls no longer whispered. They thundered. The marble beneath Jasmine Crockett's heels felt charged, as if the floor itself remembered every name she had spoken and waited for justice to fall like rain. Trump was no longer the force that had walked in. His once unbreakable posture now sagged beneath invisible weight-off evidence of history, of a truth too precise to escape. His team whispered frantically behind him, but Jasmine wasn't watching them anymore. She was watching the country. Let the record show, she said, addressing the chair, that as of today, $148 million in pandemic-era redirection tied to the Trump Organization has been identified. 32 shell companies, 14 states, 871 veterans, 93 children. She paused, turned toward the camera, eyes steady. These aren't statistics, they are stories interrupted. She stepped aside, revealing a wide monitor brought in by her staff. With one nod, it lit up row after row of faces. A 10-year-old boy named Jeremiah Grant, asthmatic, denied oxygen equipment in rural Alabama. A nurse from Boston, Patricia Myers, who lost her husband to COVID while Trump's resort installed silk drapery in guest spas. A community doctor from Tulsa, who used a crowd-funded ventilator while the government's supplies sat in a warehouse labeled reserve inventory. Each face stayed on screen for 3 seconds before fading into another. One Mississippi mother watching at home wept audibly. She's saying their names, she whispered to no one, hand over her mouth. Someone's finally saying their names. Back in the chamber, Trump stood again, this time, slowly. He tried to summon the familiar venom in his voice. You've made your point, Crockett. Congratulations. You've weaponized bureaucracy. But America doesn't care about binders and memos. They care about strength. They care about leadership. Jasmine turned. No, Mr. Trump, she said, her voice a blade sheathed in velvet. They care about truth. They care about the grandmother who waited 6 hours in an ER hallway because the federal ventilator shipment never came. About the veteran who was told to just wait it out while his lungs collapsed. They care about accountability. She stepped forward again. And they care about this. She held up the last piece of evidence, An item never seen before, revealed for the first time. A check, handwritten, dated April 3rd, 2024. Signed, Donald J. Trump. Made out to Goldstrand Transport LLC, one of the deepest shell layers in the Patriot Health logistics web, for $675,000. Memo line, off the books delivery reserve. This check was deposited 24 hours before the Milwaukee shipment was marked lost. She placed it in a clear evidence sleeve and handed it to the clerk. That check is now part of the public record. Trump turned, eyes darting. No words came. Then Jasmine spoke, not to him but to the entire room. Government is not a private company. It does not exist to coddle a brand or preserve a dynasty. It is not a vehicle for profit. It is a covenant with the people. And when that covenant is broken, someone must speak for the broken. She opened the red folder again, now nearly empty. Rebecca Lyle, age 7. Staff Sergeant Malloy, 41. William Carrington, 78. Each name spoken clearly, slowly, as if chiseling them into stone. Then, with surgical finality, she set the folder down. Your empire, she said, looking at Trump, was built on stolen breaths, and we just pulled the receipts from the rubble. Behind her, Chairwoman Mallory conferred with the clerk. A short, sharp motion. The vote would be moved up. We are advancing articles of federal referral, Mallory announced, her voice tight with gravity. Donald J. Trump is hereby recommended for criminal prosecution on charges of misappropriation of federal funds, obstruction of justice, wire fraud, and negligent homicide in connection with federal emergency mismanagement. Gasps erupted again, but not Jasmine. She didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the gallery now. In the front row, a young black girl no more than 9 wore a future congresswoman t-shirt. She stood up, mimicking Jasmine's posture. Her mother whispered, "That's who you're gonna be." In a Detroit union hall, 20 auto workers stood and raised their fists at the screen. In a Portland recovery center, a row of veterans burst into spontaneous applause. In America's living rooms, in classrooms, on factory floors, and in quiet hospital corners, people cried, people cheered, people listened. And Jasmine Crockett, cool as glass, delivered the line that would echo for generations. You called me a freeloader, but I came with documents, not excuses. And while you built your legacy on smoke and mirrors, I built mine on paper and truth. The system failed, but I didn't. She turned once more to the chair. I yield. And with that, the chamber erupted not into noise, but into resolve. The kind of silence that doesn't crumble, but builds. The kind of silence before history shifts.